Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's the most, or this is something
you're interested in the tuning system?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, I'm interested in it too. I mean, many times people aren't interested in it, but... Well, it's really incredibly simple. The tuning system is basically all of the intervals of the first 7 octaves of the harmonic series. And in this particular piece, the fundamental frequency is 10 hertz, and that's that is simply the tuning for this piece. I mean, there's some variations. I mean, in the Symphony No. 3, I used a much more pure version of this. In this particular piece, there are a few in the higher range. I don't have every single interval, just for technical reasons. It was for touring, and there's more unison tuning in this piece. I mean, I'm using more unison strings, which is definitely an aspect of the sound. I mean, I'm trying to get the most resonant possible sound. And there's no doubt that the unison technique is by far the most successful way of getting this resonance. I mean, a rich sound. You might want to ask me something specific about this. You understand what I mean when I say yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you build up certain chords which are always only contain part of the overtone.
Yeah, I mean, I can actually show you some of the charts. One of the charts is interesting because I'm dealing with, well, there's a number of different elements, but I'm basically dealing with the divisors of each number, of each tone. Now, I mean, and simply what this means is, I mean, I have a particular chart that I've made where it's easy to derive this particular...
It's multiplication.
Yeah, that one. That's the chart. Yeah. That's the divisible chart, I call it. This is my name for it. And in this chart actually has a number of different functions. One of them is that it's possible to. I was interested in the specific pitch which was common to all of the notes in a chord, for instance. The specific I don't want to say harmonic. And it's interesting that in any series of notes, there's always going to be somewhere, maybe very, 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 very high in the series, a harmonic which is common to all of the notes, which is in the harmonic series of all of the notes. That is, if all of the notes are in the harmonic series of the fundamental tone. And it's interesting that at that point, a new chord or a new harmonic series, a new series begins to develop starting from that tone, in which it is a new harmonic series which is common to every single tone in the chord. Well, what's interesting about the divisible series is that in this series, this chart depicts for each harmonic, progressively, for each harmonic, the set of tones, the complete set of tones, every single tone which has that harmonic in its series. So it's just, as a chart, it's very useful. Yeah. And at first I didn't think of it using it as actual score material. And but when I began to listen to it, it was too interesting not to use. So basically, some of the chording is taken as just a piece of the chart. And when I first started using it, I would just take a chunk to basically listen to it, and it became part of the piece. I would just take a series of, say, from 125 to 125th harmonic to the 145th harmonic, and I'd have a progression of 20 chords, which were derived completely from this chart. And now, of course, there was a little bit of course, I had to determine the orchestration a bit, but I tried to keep it as pure as possible. It is interesting to try to also determine the exact dominance of each tone. That would be interesting to me to try to find the chord where each tone is actually in relationship in volume and in every way. But that's difficult but interesting, and might be something to do in the future. The other thing is the rhythmic aspect of it. If you started dealing with breaking it into beats, the frequency of appearance of each tone could also be dealt with, also in relationship to its. And then I think you start getting a much more accurate example of what the real nature of that. Yeah. But those are very subtle, and I mean, two things to do. So at this point, it's too much time for me to deal with. But it's an interesting thing. What else did I want to say about that? But then now in this new piece, I've begun to use some of my a few compositional ideas. That are also derived from a second chart, which was derived from the first chart, which is kind of interesting. Maybe let me just dig a couple of these charts out, even though people won't get on the tape. I don't know if you want to get this, but maybe I could just say, yeah. Well, no, but it's interesting that as I have never been particularly interested in mathematics, so all of this is very new to me, but now I am interested in mathematics. And so I've started to pick up a few books because I want to begin learning some more advanced I want some more information. There's no reason why I should have to bother to go through all the trouble of figuring it out for myself when it's already been figured out. And there's no doubt I'm on the level of formulae now. There's no reason for me to continue making long charts when I can simply make a formula. Yeah. And the formula is incredibly interesting, and then that begins to develop into its own, of course, its own long chart. And then you have to make another one. But this is so. This was a different chart, and without necessarily going into the explanation of it, there's another score based on this chart because what happens here? It's so interesting. I'd have to explain this chart a little bit. The way I derived this chart was actually I was more interested in a kind of fugue type of score. And I wanted to, and I was more interested in a rhythmic score, like the appearance of 2 every 2 beats, the appearance of 3 every 3 beats, the appearance of 4 every 4 beats. It's sort of what I was saying as far as the frequency relating to the actual number of the tone, and the frequency of the appearances. And it was in trying to find that way of as a compositional mode that I realized that all of this also meant something completely different, and then that's how this fell into place. But in it's when I made this easier. So what's interesting about this is now this is where a computer would come in. I don't know if we had talked about computers before. Recently, someone was asking me if I was interested in using synthesizers, and I had mentioned that if well, I guess I shouldn't get too far away from the microphone, but if I have started to get a few ideas where there's no doubt that computer-generated sound could be useful because it starts to... I would love to program this sequence. First of all, it's an infinite series. So you have an infinite piece of music. Yeah. And now, of course, you do have to choose some kind of a limitation because it's an infinite this way also as far as the length of the chord. So my limitation, I think in this case, is probably the first 7 octaves again. And I realize it's incredible that in the chord it would be... I have not been able to calculate yet at what point there would be that this entire series would repeat again. See, this is at the point where from 1 to 128 would appear as one chord, because obviously it has to come somewhere. Yeah. And I've been trying to calculate that with little calculators, and then I got a statistical calculator, which still was nowhere near good enough, so it has to go...
Now you have your microcomputer.
Now I'm going to have to get a little computer, but... it's in the millions, but it is interesting that in as short a period as 7 octaves, there is it can go through a series of a chord progression which is in the millions and never repeat once until it reaches this. This would be the first time that it would repeat. It's also interesting that when it does repeat, of course, it then goes through exactly the same progression again all over within the first 7 octaves, and of course down here it's going through, still continuing through a different progression. But I guess I was getting off where I was trying to get into here.
So you wanted to explain how it came from that to that?
Oh, okay, from this to this. Well, let's see. I wish I had the. This is what the problem is. This chart is actually the real way this chart is done is like this, which is too bad. It has to be. I've got to find an ashtray. I know we're getting a bit messy. What's so beautiful about this tuning system is that, I mean, I've noticed, I'm sure somewhere, some composer has worked with this particular tuning system, but I could never understand. Every time I've looked when someone's worked with a harmonic series, they've always chosen one specific interval and then duplicated this interval across an entire octave, maybe 30 of them or 40 of them. And it's so obvious that so you have to use this tuning system in order to be able to use all of this material. But I guess it's this idea of such irregularity is just unappealing to people. Everyone wants everything to be perfect in its place and exact, and this idea of the octave constantly getting bigger and the intervals constantly getting bigger. Oh yeah, I have some graphic stuff based on this that's the first thing that really got me excited is when I saw the crystals appearing and I realized what was going on, and then it just completely exploded from there. But I was having problems here. So this is the second chart, which again was simply made for the purpose of deriving the material. I wasn't interested in this as any kind of use, but then it became valuable because I discovered another process that was occurring. For instance, every time the sixth, what happened is with this chart, I realized that every time the sixth appeared, there was also a new ascending series of a tone 1 plus 1 plus 1 along with it. I mean, it was appearing for the 76th time and the 77th time. It's always very simple, and the 78th time. Yeah. But before, though, that information was way down here, so I wasn't making a correlation. This was an easy way of doing it. I could just easily place all the sixes and underneath it place how many times, and I got. So it's actually this is the six. 6 is the 72nd harmonic. Hold on, no. 72. What am I saying? Yeah, that's right. 6 is the 72nd harmonic of. What is this? Hold it. I'm getting. Oh, that's right. 432 is the 72nd harmonic of 6, and it's also the 6th harmonic of 72. But what I realized, I wanted to work with a fairly common compositional technique in harmony of the movement constantly moving in or moving outward. So I realized with this chart that was very easy to do because that process existed, kind of exists here. If I change from right. If I change from maybe that's wrong. If I change from the 8 to the 9, right? That's correct. Change from the 8 to the 9. From the 8 to the 9 it goes up, and from the 54 to the 48 it goes down and moves closer. So I simply wanted to deal with that particular kind of harmonic movement, and I was just able to use this chart to derive it. It was very simple, but as you can see in this chart, there's also a number of other relationships that are quite interesting. I mean, I started to see this particular thing happen, which is definitely, it reminds me of an orbital kind of relationship, because then here's where I began to work with, now this I haven't really done too much in scoring with yet, but instead of working with the sequence of one number, I started to work with the sequences of pairs of numbers. 15 and 28 obviously relates to 16 and 27, and which relates to 17 and 26. Now, although I've circled this, it wouldn't necessarily be obvious if you were just looking at this chart, because they don't, they don't come up in an even pattern. You see that they're getting closer and closer together until they finally come down to this point, and I'm not really sure what to do with it. I have some of it. This type of thing is, at the moment, is more interesting on paper than it would be to listen to. But it is just something that, I don't know, is a bit interesting. I just want to show you some of the things that were happening in the charts. This was simply depicting the movement of a series of a sequence of tones. How it developed, and eventually, let me see if I have a development of that. Oh, here's another development like that. But of course that can be depicted in any number of ways. It's just interesting graphically, like the different possibilities that are there. Clearly there's a few things. But, okay, so I was only explaining how I had used some of the charts to derive some of the score material. But it's, I like to stay as close to what seems to be. I like to not distort what is actually here, if I can possibly do that, because it's interesting to me that I have not actually developed any of these actual, any of this actual material. It's also interesting that as you progress farther into the chart, the chords become more interesting. And the first thing that I've noticed is that there's a definite feeling of resolution and expectancy at the same time, constantly with each chord. In the Third Symphony, as I said, I was just using a progression of chords, and it is interesting where there is a feeling that the next chord is resolving, but it's not really resolving, and it's definitely asking to be resolved at the same time, which is very interesting. And plus the fact the interval relationships become more and more unusual as it progresses. But it's not just that. It's just as far as feeling is concerned. I don't, which is interesting to me. There's a feeling here. There's a feeling of this ascent. It definitely exists. It's a feeling of a deepening and a widening at the same time, which definitely exists. It's not necessarily easy to get this across to an audience. I'd say what I really am interested in doing is trying to present some of this material in a coherent fashion, which could be understood, and to present the music in relationship with the material. It's just, again, that's what was intended in the Third Symphony. Graphic depictions of what people are actually listening to, and I think the power would be so much greater, the way I visualize it. When people realize that this information, the problem is that people would think that it was simply some mathematical process, a formula, not realizing it's not. It's very simple, using a mathematical process to simply discover what's already there. Just using and I'm not saying everyone. I'm saying many people have this preconception. I might have been one of them. A few years ago.
What was an interesting experience for me was when I was listening to the tunings. I first had heard it, just the piece, and the second time I listened to the whole tuning process, and then it got much clearer, just to have the element.
Yeah. There's
no ear.
Well, I was going to say there's no doubt about that. Of course, if you have no idea what is behind it, it's not going to make as much sense. But when I first started working with this, I didn't realize at all what I was working with. It was simply an idea to do it because I'd been working with tunings, and then when I first realized the possibility for working with it as a real system, beyond simply as another kind of step to get at this idea of working with acoustic phenomena that I was interested in, I never really seriously thought, now you're going to develop a system, now you're going to find a new system of music. I was not interested in that. I really wasn't. But the more I've worked with it, the more I realize this is not an outrageous idea. This is not an impossible idea. There's nothing strange about this at all, and not only that, the potential in this system, and it's not even a system, it's just something that exists. It's right there. Just take it. It's free. The potential in this, for a musical mind, for someone who wants to work with music, is so great. It's so rich. It's like the richest vein of gold you could ever strike. That when composers start discovering this, it really is going to be a real system. It's so complicated as far as the kind of instruments and the precision of the tuning and all of that. In relationship to the system that we're so used to, But really, I have not said this to anyone, and I'm not necessarily interested in getting this out. I don't want people to start thinking I'm pushing a system and then I'm against, equal temperament and all of that. I really am not interested in getting into that battle. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I'm just saying to you, I think it's incredibly interesting that it really is. It's just unbelievably exciting and totally real. It's totally realistic possibility, because once you begin to accept what it is. Once you begin to accept the some of the hassles it takes to deal with it, and once they're no longer hassles, once you're just used to them, it's just an approach to music. Now what I'm really getting into is I've stayed away from, it's really funny, I've had all of these great intervals to work with, and I haven't worked with very many of them. Even in this new piece, I'm really not working with very many of the intervals that are not, the people aren't used to listening to. One reason is they're not going to sound right to some people's ears.
Yeah.
You know.
It's because our ears are spoiled by the temperament.
Right.
So anything else is derivation.
Right.
It takes us always some time to get used to it.
There's no doubt about that. And, but I mean, I'm not really sure about that. But I mean, I know that there's no doubt that the intervals that people are used to are also the richest intervals as far as the most harmonious. They are the most harmonious intervals, even on paper. So that's one reason why I'm still sort of interested in working with them. But now I'm definitely getting bored enough that I'm going to get on with it. You know, there is one section in the piece which is really becoming my favorite section. It's also incredibly interesting to me. I've never known too much about music theory really, but it's also interesting that the series will, now the word is slipping my mind, it's a very common musical term, when you're moving from one key to another, do you know the term for that? No, not trying to...
Modulation.
Modulating, yeah. The modulation that goes on here is the most exquisite modulation and unbelievable. And what I love, I've done in both of my pieces, and I love to think that I know people, like for instance, especially the critics who are constantly attacking me about a number of things involving this, don't even know what the fuck that they're listening to modulation from incredibly tiny intervals, thinking they're just listening to normal chord progressions, and they're actually listening to the most incredible modulation could ever imagine. If they saw it on paper, what it was. And I've tried to point it out to a few of my composer friends who might be interested, and even they don't really care or know or grasp what it is, and it's amazing. And in the new piece, there's one section early in the first movement, or at least in the first movement as being performed now, which is really a series of very small intervals, and it's almost like the ABCs. I set up the first, it continually repeats the interval, and as the interval, the series of intervals, going from, actually probably about an eighth of a tone intervals, getting constantly a little bigger and a little bigger. But they're very, very small, and it almost sounds like it's just one tone kind of descending to some extent. I don't know if you remember that, but then I slowly bring in the chords based on these charts, which relate to the intervals. Now, and the chords are completely consonant for the most part. I mean, there are a few kind of like soft dissonant chords, but and it's incredible the fact that I don't know who the hell that is. I hope I don't have anything in this piece. Not that I tried to obscure in the last one, but in the last one it obscured itself. It wasn't, but there's no point, the only way I could put it is there's no point in which it sounds out of tune. I mean, these intervals definitely, if they were played just as a melody, it would sound like a totally out of tune melody to the ear. But when they're played in relationship with the chords that are derived from here, it does not sound out of tune. It may sound a little strange, but it's in no way out of tune. So some way the rest of the chord modulates to the next chord, somehow resolves to the next chord. They all fit together in just the right way to make that pitch, which is slowly descending, work. And so that's the kind of thing I'm much more interested in working with now, and also in working with. I think of some of the intervals. I think of it all as a key sometimes. I mean, if you take the two tones and then write out the entire series of the tone, and then you can see the relationships of, the relationship that's going on, and then you can then think of that as sort of a key and work completely within that key. That's one thing I want to do. What I'm saying is I've been working with the relationships of already known. For instance, one key that I was working with is like 8 to 9, which is just a second. It's as close in the harmonic series as you can get to an equal second. It's a just second is what it is. But I was considering working with 9 to 10 or 10 to 11, which for me is much more interesting. I mean, and the stuff that's there is beautiful, but it's a little more subtle, and to many ears, especially at a high volume, is definitely going to be more difficult to get across. And I think the 8 to 9 is beautiful too. I don't have anything against that interval. I mean, so, but now I really do want to start hearing some more things.
So I think your kind of composition takes a lot of trying out, because it's really difficult to figure how it will sound from paper.
Yeah. Yeah, well, once you know, there are certain things, I mean, it's like anything else, I'm learning, so then there are many things that now I understand, and I can kind of visualize how they're going to sound, but I'm more interested in the things that I can't visualize. I'm wanting, it's like exploration is incredible, it's just so exciting, it's outrageous, and because of since I don't have a computer, I'm still kind of using this very primitive system, so I'm always kind of getting to the next page, and I can sort of hear where that's going, and I really would like to record, let's say, a series from 1 to 1,000, and you really have to hear them in order. You definitely have to hear the chords in order to understand where it's going. And because it actually, even on the charts, when you look, there are certain pockets of areas that are more sparse. There are other areas that are much more dense, but then there are some areas that are clearly more, like all of a sudden it will clump into a series of very consonant chords, and then go into a series of maybe very sparse, kind of like lean, harsh chords. And so it's not only is it progressing, but it's like the feeling that it gives you definitely is of movement in a direction and an opening up into another direction, and then kind of building towards a different idea. It's almost as though there are nodes. I mean, there are nodes, obviously, but it's almost like the nodes of what the sound what connotations the sound has in your mind, which is the more the psychological aspect of it, which I think is just as valid as any other aspect of it. I don't see why that should be ruled out. And I mean, on one hand, that could be called superstitious. Maybe it is, but it's interesting, and I don't think it should be ruled out. I don't see why. I think Lamont Young talks. This is one thing he's really interested in, is this idea of tone sparking very specific areas in the brain, specific tones activating specific areas, and I think that's going much farther than I'm necessarily thinking about. But definitely, I think there's a validity in this, and I do like to think about that aspect of it too, and. So that's interesting. I do, because again, when you look at this chart, I mean, visually, the chart is definitely telling you something. I mean, if you saw this chart in its original form, obviously these two sections are together, and if you see the massive chart, it has incredible connotations. Just if you want to see the potential in what's there. On one level, it has this quality of kind of going into depth, going back like that, like a field.
Yeah.
Just going farther back, you could see it. Any number of patterns that could be seen in that. Of course, the mind is going to try to put it together in all its possible patterns. But I think the same thing happens when you actually hear it. I think that the fact that it looks like that has something to do with what it's about. I think it has a very definite relation to why it exists and what it is. But what that is, I'm not sure. I'm not saying it very well, but I want to look at every aspect of it, and it's absolutely mind-boggling. I don't know if how much you know about this particular. How much you've studied acoustics, and how much are you very familiar with some of this?
Some.
Mm-hmm. Because I've been looking into it very deeply, and it's astonishing.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that's interesting about this is the idea of symmetry, and that's again something else I've become interested in through this, and again working with some graphic representations. I've come up with a number of different, I have some charts that are actually very bad, some of the graphics I've tried to do. Because here's what I was trying to depict, three-dimensional, I was trying to visualize three-dimensionally because this is, in space obviously you're having a three-dimensional thing, yeah. When I began to see that there was a potential there, so I thought of some charts that would do this. Well, I was trying to think if, just as far as numbers are concerned, if you thought of it instead of the 1 as being a 1, you thought of it as a block with a 1 on each side.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course expand. So, but these charts are really horrible. I didn't bring the ones that are good. This was I don't know if you know about the swastika chart. I got in trouble for this one. Have you seen this one?
No.
I didn't show this one in Germany. I don't want it to be shown. That was one depiction of it. There are a number of others. This is a poor... There was a series that I did. And here, let's see the numbers right. This was the block. This was like one layer of it, if you took one layer.
Yeah.
And I began to develop, starting with... I was trying to think in terms of... Oh, this was it. I was thinking in terms of spirals. And so I wanted to not only graphically see a spiral, but one which worked mathematically. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I say mathematically, that also had in the numbers. See, the numbers are covered over here, so you can't actually see. But what I did was I followed 4 directions. It's just very simple. Was going... I started at 1, and then I went up for 2, to the left for 3, down for 4, to the right for 5, as I wanted to spiral. And so let's see if I have that. Oh, here it is, yeah. This was the first one, where I just made those, and then when I simply followed it, because what I wanted to see was what numbers it was going, how it was developing as far as this chart was concerned. I mean, what was being ignored and what was being used in order to create that spiral. And then let's see, these are all very simple things here. Somehow I had, through using some different ideas. Right, of course, then when you start dealing with that directionality like that, the 4 different directions, I wanted to write a spiral score. The Third Symphony was intended to be one long spiral. Because again, that's a visual representation of the harmonic series, the seashell and all of that. And I wanted to figure out a way of representing that with music, which I still haven't done, because none of this works musically yet for me. Yeah. No. It's incredibly complex. And when I was working with these charts is where I discovered the fact that every aspect, no matter where you look at it, is completely and absolutely interconnected with every other aspect, that's when I say is astounding. And that was the thing. There was no way I could find any aspect of this. I could try to represent it in any form where it did not have a symmetrical relationship. I'm sure to people who have studied mathematics or any kind of advanced in sciences, that all of this is very, very basic stuff. It's probably like freshman and sophomore mathematics, but I don't necessarily think that it's sometimes, I mean, my work really a lot of my work has had to do with simplicity. And I found that in the most simple ideas and techniques, I've always had the most success. I mean, I've always had the most satisfaction. Actually, the whole thing started with what could be represented by this chart, because I was interested in the harmonics on the string. So these are the locations of the first 16 harmonics on the length of a string. Uh-huh. If the string was actually that long, part of it is cut off. That is exactly where those harmonics could be found, you might say. I mean, for instance, if you, with my technique, where I use a bar which rubs over the string, and this other octave bar, which I could explain technically how this works. It's not something that happens with a normal string. Actually, this is something I discovered, and which maybe sparked the whole thing off. Was this one particular sounding technique where if you played on one side of the strings, you no longer heard any of the fundamental tones. You only hear the harmonics. And actually, that device is used in the piece. I don't know if you saw the instrument that he was using a slide on, and then they were playing, and you were hearing all of those. Well, those were those were this. It was this. But it wasn't that technique he was using is not something that could be done with a conventional guitar, and it actually is for instance, if a conventional guitar was used, it would sound like a Hawaiian steel guitar. You would just hear the sliding, and but you can see then of course I had a little bit of a graphic representation here of it because you can choose any. This could be depicted 1,000 different ways, but I simply chose made the lowest tone, the first the second harmonic. The first harmonics are here. The first harmonic is, the second harmonic is the first one, and made that the longest, and then one increment for each smaller harmonic, just so I could graphically see what it looked like. And of course, graphically, it gives you. Some of the things I've seen, I wish I had some of the really good graphics. This was just this one particular thing. But it's definitely a kind of a primeval, that's the only way I can describe it, is a primeval visualization of some sort.
How do you form a bigger musical complex?
What's that?
How do you make up a bigger musical complex?
You talking about the score? Or what are you talking?
Yeah. Or how do you? Yeah.
How do I write a large piece? I mean, how do I structure?
How do you structure then? When you don't then structure in these mathematical ways?
Right. Well, I'm drawn in all of the directions. I mean, I'm interested in working with themes, and so I think I said something about over the lunch. The theme I was interested in working with the unison tone. That's one way, for instance, when I kind of come onto a theme, and then this is a very common approach of how to kind of do variations on the theme, how to modulate the theme from key to key, or all of that. I think in those terms sometimes, but I usually don't get to that. I'm more interested in dealing with what I've been calling for years this emotional structure. I like to find a structure that is something in me that I don't talk about, I don't put into words, I don't even necessarily think about, but something that for some reason can be manifested in music and has its meaning. It has very definite meaning, but not necessarily in relation to any of this. This is nothing. I could do it with anything. The instruments wouldn't necessarily have to be in tune at all to get across some of the things I want to get across. And so sometimes I'm interested completely in trying to get to the most clear possible representation of that kind of an idea. I mean, I try to stay as close to this as possible, but sometimes some of this becomes so interesting that of course you can start getting blinders on and losing sight of everything else, which is the big danger. So usually in each piece I like to have the kind of theoretical section and sort of giving a little bit of everything, but also showing the relationships between everything. So I will. I could write out 15 minutes of music in 2.5 pages in longhand as an outline sometimes, just of what it is I want to the kind of movement I want the piece to have, the kind of feeling I want it to have, and the rest is easy from there. I mean, I can use virtually any kind of. Actually, I've taken some of these structures and written completely different harmonic ideas for them, which is interesting too. I can't help it. I am interested in working with. I like the idea of making very, very clear statements, and I have to admit this is not something I have been able to do yet, but I think when my work matures and I have a chance to relax and spend some time working, that I think I will be able to present some work which is going to be very interesting. Because I like to work with something that is very, 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 very obvious to everybody. And I think I have a problem that sometimes I think things that are obvious aren't as obvious as I think that they are. But say giving the audience 3 or 4 or 5 very obvious images, and of course I'm talking in terms of sound, but I'm also interested in the visuals too, but just in terms of sound, the themes. When I think in terms of themes, not themes that only can be understood, how they're developed, only can be understood by an academic. I mean, that's why I'm trying to find. I want to find themes that are clear, and then develop those themes, develop them, and let them fight with each other, and let them play with each other, and play with them in the head of the listener. You know, I mean, talk to the listener through my themes. I create the language first, and then begin to make the sentences. And that is definitely the kind of... It's about communication. I want to talk to the audience about all the things that I can't talk to them about for any number of reasons. And talk to them about all the things that we all know are true and no one wants to admit, and or the things that we don't know and no one wants to admit. I want to talk about those things. And... music is definitely the medium, because it's nonverbal communication, you know, and it's also, in a way, I think it's more sexual, it's more tactile than the talking. It's almost because obviously there's a physical quality, because it is physically touching you, and of course with very loud music it's even touching you more, and I like to think of all of the senses as a sense of touch anyway, and I think music or sound is certainly a pretty obvious one, and so this kind of communication is really the excitement. On the other hand, there's a kind of this type of a structure where I'm dealing with a very highly structured score has its definite limitations. So there's the other structure, which is in a way much more difficult to develop, because this is the kind of structure where you really have to, at least for me, it's maybe once every 2 years or 3 years I'll come across you might say a prototype of it's a process. I'm really just talking about process music, but finding that right one, which is it can constantly develop and change without having to predetermine, but also satisfying any number of other needs too. Finding that is much more difficult than finding the formula is more difficult than writing a book, is what I'm saying, you know. And so really that formula is what I'm most interested in finding. I have one now that, what am I calling it? I don't remember, it's been crazy. No, I haven't been able to work on it for about 8 months or something, so I'm not. But it's too complex at the moment. It's absolutely beautiful because it relates directly to the symmetry of the series. It's a process which really is. But on the other hand, when you get into this kind of symmetry, I'm never going to be able to develop a formula which has the absolute perfection of this symmetry, so it's mind-boggling. At one moment I'm willing to accept that it has its limitations, and then sometimes I'm not willing to accept it, so it continues going back on the shelf. And I don't expect to develop a process that's going to have, obviously, the perfect symmetrical potential, but I do want one that could be used. Then you can put anything into it. It's really a formula where you can put in any variables you want, and then it it tells you, it does the rest, and it. So that's the other process, and one reason I want this process is because, I mean, this kind of a structure or score is because I know that, as I said, with a very, very tight structured score, the limitations are very great as far as the potential of how far it can go and how far it can take the mind. And I think when the mind begins to realize that it's no longer that it's out there by itself, I mean that it's not being led, that it can go where it wants, then the potential for it to go very far is much greater. And I mean, I'm interested in what is the potential of how far the mind can go, and we all, I mean, I'm sure would agree that the potential is very, very, very great. And that's what I want to see happening, and that's why it really irritates me, this fascist stuff that was happening in Germany. I don't know if that was happening in the concerts you went to, but some of the other concerts.
No, in Berlin it wasn't.
In Berlin it wasn't, but in Munich and in Frankfurt, and it was mainly Munich and Frankfurt. It might have been something in Bochum. I'm not sure, but it's mainly Munich and Frankfurt, and the press and all of that. It's not that I don't like being called a fascist. The public this is very appealing. It's sensational. So people, it becomes a limitation. I mean, for me, it becomes a limitation because that many labels have been given my music and have not successfully attached.
Yeah.
It's not that this one's successfully attached, but people like to talk about this one, so it's something that starts to stay in someone's mind when they're listening to the music, and they want to say, even if they don't necessarily think that it's important, it's still going to. Okay, well, I was only saying that it's upsetting to me. For so much of the fascist stuff to be going around, mainly in the press and in the audiences, because it's limiting to the music, and if this idea is in someone's mind, it's not going to be possible for them to let their mind be as free as it could be. One reason is it narrows the possibilities of the music, and then another reason is that someone might actually be scared to let their mind open because they feel that maybe they are being manipulated. Some people say brainwashed. You know, I mean, it really.
Yeah.
I just, you know.
I think it's a specific German taboo.
Right.
That you're always afraid of that music. That you get involved with music physically.
Oh, I see. So I didn't realize that.
It's only for the brain. Sit there and quietly listening to it. And so everything that appeals to the whole of physics is...
Well, I think there's a difference between the brain or the intellect and the mind. I think there's two big differences there. And it's sort of the difference between what I was saying about a type structure dealing with themes and this other. I think one is the brain or the... and this word is really the possibility of the mind, because.
But the normal situation of avant-garde music is that you have sitting there brains,
right,
without anything else.
That's, I think,
or brains with ears.
Yeah, that's the situation. Well, I think that the mind is the whole body, you know.
Yeah.
And that. So my music is about bodies and brains and everything else with ears.
How does it connect to the works of Robert Longo? You have sometimes worked with him together.
Well, I don't see...
or does it connect?
No, it doesn't, no.
Perfect.
There's nothing to do with his work whatsoever. I like his work. That's how it connects.
Yeah.
But there's no real relationship.
It would be nice if you could describe your way from the theoretical girls to Symphony Number 4, or what to your opinion has changed or stayed, or...
Well, on one level it hasn't changed much at all. As far as the way I approach the work, it really hasn't changed. What's changed is that I've just come into some territory that is much richer than any territory I've ever been in before. So, but the way I approach it, I think, is very similar. I mean, I've been looking for a long, 15 years at least. I've been looking, and in every means possible. And in Theoretical Girls, I was really, and before Theoretical Girls, with other things that I was working with, I was really trying out different possibilities in the context of short rock songs or pieces, and each piece tended to be a different idea. That was usually the case. Sometimes I guess I would just write a song, but it was fun, and that was what was nice about having this band situation. Really, I didn't feel I wasn't too critical. I'd let myself kind of do what I wanted to do, whether it might have seemed like it was particularly, whether it was liked or not. It didn't mind. I won't get into that. So we tried a lot of different things, and I was working with a guy named Jeff Lone, who was also writing music for this band.
I had an interview with him.
He's a different person, isn't he? Well, what I like about Jeff is that Jeff definitely loves to represent the more academic side of music, even though he hates academic music, of course. But in relationship to me and all my talk about harmonics, which is, he thinks is bullshit and crazy, which, but it's interesting to have the discussions with him. He has been, I've learned from him, and I really like his music. I think he's a great composer. And again, I think, he's a difficult composer, though, because he has an incredible sense of humor, and I don't think people realize almost every one of his pieces is very, very, very dark humor in the work, and smart humor too. And that's one of the things that's great about his music. That really my music lacks to some extent. There's definitely some of it there, but we won't talk about Jeff too much. But I really like him, even though he's kind of an asshole. So what else were we saying? We're talking about Theoretical Girls. So yeah, Jeff and I basically, we worked together on that. We definitely fed off of each other. There's no doubt that there was a very hot competitive thing happening there. I mean, he would probably say it's not true, but we definitely were really like fighting, and it happened incredibly quickly. I mean, the whole thing from the beginning to the end of the band was, the band was no longer really working very much, was maybe 5 or 6 months, but the amount that we progressed in that period was amazing. It was just one of those explosions. It was amazing. So from that point on, I had to start another band because I had too many ideas. It was impossible to do everything in that band. Plus, the fact working with someone else becomes difficult. So again, I was trying everything else. I had a band called The Static, and that was really, I was thinking about performance too, not just the music. I was really trying to make visually what was happening help the music and vice versa. And I wasn't thinking at all. When I was talking to you about emotional structures, this band was really dealing with only that aspect of it. And there was really very little thought whatsoever about the music concerns. When I say performance, I don't mean slideshows. And I'm serious. And then really it was very simple. I've had ideas about tunings and ideas about different kinds of strings on electric guitars. I was very interested in the rock stage. The rock stage was always something that was clearly the most vital form of performance that was happening, and I love rock, and it was something I always wanted to work with, but never really thought was possible. Whenever I thought of myself on a rock stage doing the kind of ideas I wanted to do on the rock stage, I just thought there was no way I could ever get a gig, get a job in a club, or the audience would leave or throw me out or something. Yeah. And it was just amazing that just at that moment in New York, it was time where it could happen. Believe me, even 6 months earlier, it would have been impossible to do. It just happened that it was right at the very end of the punk scene, the whole Patti Smith television talking heads kind of scene, but there was still an incredible audience and interest. And plus that scene, it also, I think, brought a lot of, mainly artists who became interested. And of course, artists understand a whole other sensibility, a way of thinking about work. So then when you're able to combine the two, it just was too exciting for people to ignore. It was too exciting to not only be able to be thrilled and excited by the sound and the atmosphere and the performance, but also be able to see this sensibility in that context. It was too much to pass up, so it just was, and it was something I'd always never thought was possible. So then I was in the perfect situation. I had my stage and my audience and everything. But then, as I said, I finally went ahead with the idea about using a different tuning, more guitars than 2 or 3 in a normal band situation. I wrote a piece called Instrumental for 6 Guitars. And the reason I did the piece is because I was invited to do something on my own instead of in a band context. Mm-hmm. And it just all came out in this piece. And the last section of the piece, again, was an experiment with an extreme density of sound. And after the first rehearsal of this, I was in tears. The musicians were shocked and amazed at what we heard, so that was it. From there, I knew this is what I had to work with.
So it was for all of you, good.
Yeah. And it was, I just never heard anything like it, and I clearly had to explore it, and as I explored it never stopped opening up, and now it's opened up to the point of that I could never imagine it would have opened up to.
Mm-hmm. When you call a piece of yours symphony,
mm-hmm.
What does it relate to, or to which meaning, or which meaning is the wrong word. But when you say symphony, different people have different things in mind.
Right. Well, I noticed
something huge, or that's the context, or what.
Well, I noticed here in Europe the idea of symphony is definitely not appealing to the young people, because everywhere I go they make the symphony as small as possible. So in New York it's the opposite. It's the symphony that brings them. The idea of the symphony in this context is just too interesting to people. But here it's like, I must be in the schools that the children are so... classical music must be very unpleasant to many people here, because it seems as though the idea of calling it a symphony is just the worst possible thing that you could ever do if you want an audience.
Classical music is just something you get dressed up and watch, and then sit neatly in the audience and wait till it's finished.
Right.
I remember my first time hearing Bruckner Symphony, where I really got sick and had to vomit afterwards. And it took me years to like it, and you have your parents, and it's very bourgeois.
Yes, that's what it is. I get it. I see. So that's what I thought, because I didn't really realize it until a few days ago.
But on the other hand, for me, there's something very appealing about something. Thinking especially on Bruckner, these things that I think the dream from if Bruckner had amplifications, he would have used it.
No.
He has this dream of static fields and masses and
really?
All this, and so
I didn't realize that I never really listened very much to Bruckner, but so many people have mentioned him that I'm definitely going to start listening. But well, first of all, I mean, in the sense of music, I mean, symphony certainly is intended to be the form that is used for the highest aspiration of an artist. It's definitely meant to push it to the most serene form, and that's what my music is. I mean, I think in terms of my music. On the other hand, really what I was interested in when I called it a symphony, I wanted to write a large ensemble piece. I wanted to write full evening pieces. I've been involved in the theater for years. That really was what I was doing for a long time, and music was always kind of secondary to that. And I was never trained in music. I was trained in theater, and yeah, so that's what I was interested in. I had my own group. I was developing pieces. I never really made plays in the conventional sense. I mean, I was working with performance, so that's what I was interested in. So you see, so this idea of I don't think of myself simply in terms of music. I also think in terms of performance, and so clearly the symphony to me was the form which came closest to kind of, you might say, covering both sides. The symphony seemed to be had more of a feeling of, instead of simply presenting your next work, your next piece of music, you were presenting a work which had a shape, a work which had Well, I thought of it as a perform, a full evening of a work, even though as it turns out many symphonies are not very long, but plus the fact the time seemed so right to do it. I mean, many people call their work symphonies, but it was. I mean, I think it was right. I mean, I was working with I had a good audience at the time, and I knew it, and I knew I could draw an audience, and I wanted. There are many composers who, it's just true, people who are working with new music or new forms of music don't have a very big audience. It's just the fact of the matter. And I wanted to make a somewhat of a statement that the kind of work I'm doing, even though it has nothing to do with academic music, was had a level of validity to it, and that was another level, you know. And I sort of felt it was somewhat of a statement about that too, which is not particularly interesting. It's probably stay away from that area.
Could you tell a bit about your things you made in the theater?
What I was doing in the theater?
Yeah.
Well, the theater work was developing in the same.
When did you do it?
Oh, when I let's see. Well, I started acting when I was about 12 years old, so that was about 20 years ago, 20-some years ago. And so I loved it as a kid, and I wanted to be an actor, you know. But then that developed into directing, and then when I couldn't find any plays I wanted to direct, I realized I had to write a play, so I wrote the play, and then when I wrote the play, I realized that I started to realize the potential for this kind of work. So I started doing serious work in theater, I think in the early 70s, I guess. Yeah. And I had a group in Boston called the Bastard Theater. That was something I needed. I needed to have my own space. I needed to have my own group. I needed a place to work. And what's really ironic about it is when I was in Boston with no money at all, I mean absolutely no money, I had the most beautiful space to work, and I had what you could call my controlled environment situation, which is what I'm dreaming about now, even though that's something I've already had for I guess about 2 years. I was able to develop a piece over 6 months in a completely controlled situation. It was a 2,000 square foot space, which is plenty big to do something. And I could, using even the most primitive techniques, if you have time to work with primitive lighting and primitive sound, you can give even a better production than a professional production, and that's what we were doing. I was in that time I was working with someone named John Rayberger. I actually had the group with him, and again it was similar to like working with Jeff. We didn't actually collaborate. He kind of wrote what he wrote, and I kind of wrote what I wrote, and we staged a few productions of our work, and actually they were music theater pieces because both of us were very interested in music, and at the time I was very interested in acoustic music. I didn't want to deal with synthesizers at all, and I think it kind of relates to what I'm doing now, because I sort of think of my music as acoustic music, as simply being amplified, you know, and so when I came to New York to write plays or to write theater pieces, and I actually wrote about 5 pieces in the first year that I was here without doing anything but that, and none of those pieces got performed. Again, I have this problem where I tend to want to deal with a certain kind of complexity which is technically too difficult to do unless you've got a lot of money or support or something, or a lot of resources. But I have some ideas about theater and or performance, which is kind of working in the same way my ideas about music are working. And in some ways, I think my ideas about theater were more advanced. Now my ideas about music have kind of caught up with what I was thinking about in the theater. But the music is more realistic at this point. I mean, because in the theater is dealing with many more technical problems than just instruments. But I do have a few pieces that I've been continuing to develop. I have a ballet, for instance, which originally was supposed to be done in Munich last year, which again, was just ended up being too technically difficult to deal with. It's a very difficult piece, but I think is the piece that has the closest relationship to my music. I don't think of the visuals necessarily representing in any way the music, but I think that the entire performance is coming from the same sensibility. And again, I'm working with process, especially in the ballet. It's a developing process. It's the same. I write it the same as the music. There's no difference. And I'm working. There's a couple other music theater pieces I'm interested in. Well, again, this is one of the pieces right here.
Yeah.
It's one of the music theater pieces, but this is I will not present this piece until it is absolutely accurate, and it's also got to be it's got to be clear, it's got to be to the point, and it also has to be accurate, which is that's the very difficult part. There can't be any mistakes in it, or it doesn't work. I mean, there can't be any errors in thinking or in the representation of any of the material. It has to, so that means it requires quite a bit of time. But this is the piece. This is my major piece. Is this one? But I would think it'll be at least 2 or 3 years before. Not that it's so technically difficult. It's the writing of it, because. But it's slow. I suppose the piece is starting with a pamphlet that I'm going to put out, which is basically simply charts and some descriptive material, but really it's got to have the music too, directly related. You have to be able to see this small area and hear that piece of music and the next, and also all the other possibilities. And it's, I think it's going to be the most powerful thing I could ever imagine doing. Because it's the most, to me it's like a perfect piece, because I've always been interested in dealing with theater that is not, that is about, that is not,
What's setting to see?
Yeah, that's right. I'm not interested in dealing with plays. I'm not interested in dealing with any of that type of. I'm not interested in dealing with distancing, or any Brechtian effects even. I mean, necessarily Brechtian ideas, really. I mean, I'm interested in dealing in the space and time that everybody is in at that moment. And what's so interesting about this is I can develop this material using this as my material. This is my text, you might say. I can develop it the same way I would develop any text. Any fictional text, but it isn't fictional. That I've been finally looking for this text that is not fictional. There was one text I was going to use written by Raoul Vaneigem. I don't know if you know of this. The Situationist.
Yes.
Yeah. And for years I was interested in this text, but I had lost it and it was impossible to find. And I finally found it again, and I wasn't interested in the fucking text anymore, which was really a pity, because I thought this was my text. He was talking completely about reality. I mean, it was really talking about reality in the terms of reality, and it was perfect. But now it's not interesting to me anymore. But now I found this, and I mean, it's too perfect, because the potential, it starts off in such extreme simplicity, and develops into something that's very interesting. Then something that's very absorbing, then something that begins to imply incredible potential. It begins to imply, because it relates to every area of thinking, eventually, and that's the way the piece would develop. I mean, I would attempt to develop the piece you might say to a point where the level of reality would become closer to the audience at each progressive state. That's the only way I could put it. So, that's a lot of stuff. What, is there anything else specific you wanted to know?
I think so.
Oh, okay. We've gone on and on and on. Sorry. All right.